I remember with Matt, for instance, like way back when we were sitting in a bar in like the East Village, and it was when the Village Voice was still a print publication. And there was a big feature on Interpol, and he was like, man, Interpol's always going to get the features. We're always the band that like just gets forgotten about, or it just gets a small little mention, you know?
Yeah.
And I think that's like a lesson that I've learned through the years of being involved in this zone, is that it really does take a long time too. So I think booking shows and pushing for stuff you care about, not just trying to cash in on like, yeah, let's book the obvious thing, has always been my approach. And maybe it's not always the like smartest thing financially, or like, yeah, it's probably not the smartest thing financially, but it's still just like, it's a fun challenge.
Welcome to For the Record, a casual, mostly unedited conversation series presented by Grainman, where we speak with music heads about their stories and the music that makes them. I'm your host, McKeegan Voice.
Today on episode 46, I chatted with Brandon Stosuy. Brandon's the co-founder and editor-in-chief of The Creative Independent. He previously worked as director of Editorial Operations at Pitchfork. He also curates the annual Basilica SoundScape Festival in Hudson, New York, and has been a music curator at MoMA PS1 in New York City and the Broad Museum in Los Angeles. For over a decade, he and the visual artist Matthew Barney have collaborated on a series of live art and music events in Long Island City. Up is Up, but So is Down, his anthology of downtown New York literature, was a 2006 Village Voice Book of the Year. Brandon is also the author of 3 books on creativity and 2 children's books. He and I chatted about growing up in small towns, backyard festivals, prioritizing connection over profit, and so many good tunes discovered across a life lived in music. Hope you enjoy. Cool. Well, so as you probably know at this point, then I like to start at the beginning, get a sense of you and where you're from. I know you just told me before we started recording, but I'd love to get a little bit more of that context and really honing in on when your relationship with music started.
Sure. Yeah. I grew up in a very small town in the Pine Barrens of New Jersey. That's population 800 and change, maybe, like very, very small dirt road. It's in the middle of nowhere. And I lucked out where I had a friend who I'd known from before we relocated there when I was in grade school. And his name was Pete, but I nicknamed him Moss as a kid, like Pete Moss. And I still know him to this day. And he had an older sister who was, knew more about music than we did. And she loaned him a 7 Seconds cassette and a Minor Threat cassette and some sort of old hardcore and punk and all that, like Bad Brains, things like that. And so through her, we had kind of a bridge to other kinds of musics and other kinds of things. And so we would go to Philadelphia together, which was the closest city. And we go to places like 3rd Street Jazz and the Philadelphia Record Exchange and Zipperhead and places like that, and just find stuff that seemed interesting. And just like, this is obviously like way before the internet. And so we would just kind of stumble along, and some things stuck, some things didn't. But through that, I started really realizing, there's a lot of interesting stuff out in the world. And I started a zine called White Bread, which is about like essentially growing up in a white trash town, but being like, like a working class farming town, but being someone who was into things that, the town was really important to me, but also things outside of it were important to me as well. Especially when you're young, you're like, all right, the second I'm 18, I'm out of here kind of energy. And so, yeah, I started the zine and started corresponding with people through the zine, and developed a network of friends. Decided, this went on for years, and I got like Tower Records when that existed, started distributing it, and it was getting reviewed in like Fact Sheet 5 and Maximum Rock and Roll and all those kinds of things. And through that, I started finding more and more friends and just kind of like corresponding, being pen pals again, like pre-internet. So just literally writing letters like, hey, here are the records I like. Here's the 7 inches I'm into.
Cool.
Yeah. And I put on a show when I started putting on shows. So I started putting on hardcore shows in the middle of nowhere. Didn't have a stage, just kind of flat on the ground, borrowed a PA from some friends. And that kind of led to when I was 17, I put on like a 2-day festival in my backyard, which I called the Indie 500, which is like a pun on indie music. It's funny, like a lot of those bands still exist. Like it was like Lilies and a lot of like the early Slumberland stuff, so like was a weird mix because I was into hardcore and metal, but also like shoegaze and noise pop. And so it was like Lilies and Versus. I tried to book Helium, but they had to back out the last second. Like the folks from Eggs who were on Teen Beat. So it was a lot of that kind of stuff. And borrowed a hay truck from someone, rented a porta potty, charged for this thing, and like paid all the bands. I kind of figured it all out, but had enough money left over that my friend Mark and I said, let's start a label. And we put out a CD compilation with some of the bands who had played. And like for them, like the band we loved at the time, who were like our idols, were that band Grifters. And they ended up signing to Sub Pop later on. But this is when they were on a smaller like Memphis label or something. And I remember like we asked them to be on the compilation. They said yes, and to us that felt like we'd nailed Nirvana or something like that. So that was like, for me, music was a way to kind of be outside of where I was and develop a community. And then like by the time I went to college, was just so deep into like having a record label, having a zine. I worked at the independent record store in New Brunswick, New Jersey called Cheap Thrills, and put shows on in my basement. I always liked putting shows on, and I think that was something that stuck with me. And like years later, when I worked at Pitchfork, Ryan and I really quickly got like burnt out on doing shows in regular venues. We're like, we've been doing this since we're 12 and 13. Like, let's try different things. That's how we booked Trash Talk at the New Museum and did a thing in DC with like Animal Collective projecting on the outside of the building, and just kind of tried different stuff because it felt like we'd been doing the one thing for so long. And yeah, I mean, I think there's a reason why shows have more and more, it's hard to sell out shows. Like I think a lot of people are just burnt out on that kind of really static formula.
Yeah.
And this was like, when we were burnt out on the static formula, it was like 15 years ago at this point or something. And Ryan and I were like, let's like try to find an abandoned mall and put on a show. That was like that kind of energy. But yes, I think like all that stuff just connected to the present. And like what I often tell my kids, like I have a kid who's 14 and one who's 11, is like, essentially I'm doing what I was doing when I was 13. The Creative Independent, like the website I publish is basically a zine. There's no ads. It's just conversations. We're not trying to sell anything. And I manage artists. I manage More Mother and Pussy Riot and some other folks. And I have a call after this with Kill Rock Stars about something. It's just sort of like, it's kind of what I was always doing, I'm still doing now, but I just kind of figured out how to make a living from it. And so music has always been important to me. But I will say, when I was a kid, I never thought I'd make a living from it. It was purely based on excitement and kind of a way to find a community, because my town was just so small. There just weren't that many people my age. And my younger brother was kind of the one friend actually in the town, So yeah, I had to sort of, and he's great, not to diminish him, but I had to like find, other people outside of that too.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. Thank you for sharing. Yeah, I'm curious, as someone else who's from a very small town in the middle of nowhere, about 600 people in small town Minnesota, dirt roads, also working class farm town, who has then moved on to bigger cities. And, for the past 15 years, I've lived in, huge places, with a ton of people. And I'm curious, what your relationship is now with, I mean, your town, with the idea of like, I don't know, let's call it small town America, even from like a nostalgic perspective, or just like, because I found myself really reorienting my relationship with my town in retrospect, and really finding the things to value in it that I couldn't at the time, because my, my experience wasn't big enough. I didn't have enough perspective in order to appreciate it. Yeah. And I'm curious to hear like, how your perspective has shifted, more broadly, but, also if you can find strands that connect, to the music that you're attracted to as well. I mean, that would be cool.
For sure. Yeah. I think one thing I realized is that I wrote a book a couple years ago that was called Make Time for Creativity. And in that book, I kind of realized through going back to my childhood that the reason I did a lot of what I did is because I was bored. And I think I was allowed to be bored in a small town. And I think now with cell phones and, constantly being hit up for various things at all times of the day. It's hard to be bored. And that's like I say with my kids, I tell them now, they're like, hey, just like, they have phones at this point because they have to travel on the subway and all that. I'm like, just leave the phone now and then, just do something else. And that's how your mind will wander. And it's like, I remember when I was at Pitchfork, Mark Richardson and I were about the same age, and we're like, yeah, it wasn't like we were somehow, valiant geniuses or something. We were just bored. So we're like, let's just like read, or like, there's like nothing to do. So we had like 2 TV stations, a dirt road. Yeah, my brother and I, sometimes our big excitement would be to walk to the end of the driveway and get the mail. Like, that was basically it. So we're like, what else are you going to do? No, I'm not going to watch The Price is Right or soap operas or something. So let's like make zines and make our own projects. So I think, yeah, we just kind of did it by default. And, my brother did a zine and all that stuff too. Like after I did mine, he's like 3 years younger. I was like, oh, this is cool. This seems like an interesting outlet. So I think that I look back on that and how that I really value that. I also value, I was just visiting my dad last weekend, who lives in the Pine Barrens still. And to me, it's just like there's the memories of it there that are really resonant. The outdoors of it is beautiful. We just spend a lot of time walking and hiking. And, I have a dog here in Brooklyn. And when we're there, just like, all right, go wander, like that kind of thing, just that kind of freedom, which I think of as a child too. Like we would basically, my brother and I would leave the house in the morning and come back 10 hours later, like covered in mud and like, hey, we caught a snapping turtle and all that kind of stuff. That's much harder here in New York. Yeah. I think too, just I having these sort of conversations in a small town, maybe people I didn't agree with entirely on all of their politics or this or that, but being able to have conversations. And I think that was very important to me, and still having those friends and still having that community. And like one of my best friends when I was younger, I'd written a book about crying, like the act of crying. And he wrote me, and he's a police officer in like a small town in the South. And he wrote me, I'm like, hey, remember we used to be skateboarders? And I read the book and it really struck with me. And I was sort of thinking like having those friendships that still exist and being able to like talk. And he talked to me about how he cried at his grandmother's funeral because she asked him to sing like a Travis Tritt song, like this whole kind of thing. And I'm like, maintaining those relationships is important to me. And I think that's a big part of music for me too, is the friendships I've made, like people I met through zines that I still know, even if they've gone to different places. But I think also like existing outside of a bubble and being able to like exist in a small town and be like, all right, cool. If I go here, I know I'm not gonna be able to get this exact kind of like latte I wanted or whatever. But like you can not, I don't even want a latte, but it's like the things that you want aren't always there, but you can like go and find them. And I think that's beautiful. Like, when I go to visit my dad, there's an ice cream shop by it that my kids love, and we always go to the ice cream shop. Like just creating traditions elsewhere. Like with my wife, she's from small town Pennsylvania and grew up on a farm, and we spent like months out there one summer, just like be out of the city and just to see the kids like hopping on tractors, going fishing, like all that stuff. But with music, I think the music I like now is often music that I can jog to because I run a lot, and it's like music that somehow makes me feel emotional. I often come back to music that friends make that I think sort of stick with me on multiple levels. Like I'm very old friends with Matt from The National, and I listen to The National a lot, and I think part of it is like, hey, this is just Matt talking, or like him singing but talking, and I admire his words. And I think we also have similar experiences. We're kind of around the same age. He has a kid. It's like that kind of feeling of like we're getting older, like all that kind of stuff sticks with me. But then I also really like, part of the reason I like management is like helping younger artists and kind of like helping them navigate the world. Like there's this artist who reached out to me recently, and she hasn't released anything yet, and she's 22, and I'm like helping her navigate like labels and things like that. Like to me, that's really satisfying. They're like, cool. Like I'm an old person now. I can give you some wisdom that I've learned and like maybe help you like figure out your path. And so often I'm listening to things that people send me, or I'm listening to more and more. I'll listen to just like things around the house that I have loved for years. Like I feel like we listen to like Jesus and Mary Chain a lot in our house, like on the actual stereo, and like then like newer things like Chromatics, which is not necessarily new, but it's newer. The Cure, like Disintegration, is a record I always come back to, and that
I love that record.
kids know very well. But my kids have also really gotten into like Vivo and videos, and so like often at night we've been watching that show The Bear as a family, which is very stressful. But before that, they always want to watch a few pop videos. So my kids are really into Rihanna, so we'll watch some like Rihanna videos, or like Jane and I are into Rihanna too. Like I feel like her Super Bowl show, halftime show is amazing, and it's minimalism, like that kind of thing. So yeah, I think we listen to so many different kinds of music, and certain things are new, certain things are old. But a lot of it is friends' music. I'm friends with that pianist Kelly Moran, and I've been like listening to some new stuff she's working on. People will like send demos to ask my thoughts on them. Then I'll like go and think of other things that maybe remind me of that or whatever. But there's always like the staples that I come back to all the time. And I think for me, that's like, yeah, The Cure and Jesus and Mary Chain, and sometimes like Fugazi and, you know, that kind of stuff. Yeah. And it's funny, like I shockingly go to a barber, just to like trim my beard now and then. He's been going through a grunge thing. And when he brought that up, it's like, huh. So I started listening to like a lot of old grunge because, I was like, yeah, maybe I'm gonna see how this stuff aged and how this stuff feels. Or if we're curating an event, like the festival that Melissa Oftermore and I do, that's in its like 14th year, I guess, is coming up in September. And we have like Helado Negro. So I was listening to that record a lot, his last record, and other folks playing that festival. Yeah, so it's a variety. And like now and then I still write bios, which is very, very rare. But like last year, like Caroline Polachek asked me to do her bio, so I wrote that one. And I wrote Chelsea Wolf's because she had reached out to me about that. And then I wrote the Helado Negro one. Like Roberto and I are old friends when he still used to live in New York. Now he lives in North Carolina. So it's often that, like hearing friends' stuff. And like Roberto is quite good at that, like where he's like, hey, here's some stuff I'm working on. Here's a mix I made, or just sharing things. And so a lot of the music I listen to is things people have shared with me. Because I feel like I live like a block and a half from the Capture Tracks record store. So like I'll go in there now and then, but I'm not necessarily, at this point, we have so much stuff. And I have like 2 kids who are bordering on teenagedom, and we already have enough crap that I'm not like out shopping all the time, so it is often like people bringing stuff or like sharing stuff or whatever.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question, is kind of diving into your role as curator, which I guess is something that you've been doing for a long time, since being at Pitchfork, or I guess even before that with White Bread, and like throwing festivals in your backyard. But yeah, I mean, when I first came across your work, was the first time I went to Basilica SoundScape, and I mentioned that you and I met briefly at like the after show at like the VFW or whatever that is.
The Half Moon, right? That place.
Yeah, the Half Moon.
Yeah.
I don't know why that was.
It could be. It's wood paneled on the inside, which I think is yeah.
Yeah, I think I went to Basilica in 2015 and 2016. I was actually looking at the bands that I saw before this conversation, because I'm crazy and I keep a list of every single concert I've ever been to. But like Angel Olsen and who else? Weyes Blood, Health Actress, Circuit de You, who we also connected later on to set up that podcast with Haley. The Haxon Cloak, all these like really incredible bands. Explosions in the Sky, I remember seeing.
Oh yeah.
Let's see, Mary Lattimore, Bell Witch, Theodorian, like all these like really, I don't know, it's kind of dark, it's melancholic, it's like very specific curation. I think that kind of taps into what you were saying of like your combination of like hardcore metal, but like also like shoegaze, post-rock kind of, vibes. And yeah, I guess if you could just talk about, kind of the evolution, and maybe you just answered it by saying like, you have these inputs coming in, but if you could talk about kind of the evolution of your curation, because when I think of you, I think of Basilica and this very like distinct sort of nexus, of sounds that are kind of dark, kind of melancholic. I love it. And but I wonder if it, feels the same to you, and if you could talk about a bit like that, because I've also come across, I also spent like time at MoMA PS1, and what's the summer series?
Warm Up. Yeah,
exactly, Warm Up. Like going and like there one year and talk to Tasia Cheek
Oh, yeah, yeah,
brain, and
yeah,
she was talking about how you guys worked, which is obviously a kind of a different spectrum, more electronic. So anyways, yeah, if you could
yeah,
tap
yeah,
into a little bit about your curatorial evolution over the years, if you could talk about that.
sure. I think like the warm up stuff was amazing because it was multiple people and everybody was very chill. Like there was no ego involved, which I loved. It was like, yeah, me and Taja and Matt who does like that label Revenge, Dean from True Panther, John from DFA. It was just like all these people working together, and we'd all just and Robin from Triangle, and we'd all just kind of put down our ideas in a spreadsheet and then kind of like start moving things around to see how they kind of connected and felt like they worked together. Um, and for those, yeah, I feel like Robin and I did a lot of those together, and we were always trying to like bring slightly darker stuff to warm up because we're like,
Mm,
people are going to show up no matter what. They're
yeah.
going to dance, so let's like try to mess with it a little bit. So like
Hmm.
we had Black Dice do one, for instance, and like Grimes in the early days of Grimes. It just like we would just try things to make it things that would work and we thought people would enjoy, but weren't just like a DJ doing the same thing you'd expect from a DJ to do. So we were trying to play with it a little bit, I think, and then
Mhm.
the same thing with Soundscape. Those events actually came about because I've done shows for like the last 15, 12, 14 years with the visual artist Matthew Barney. Like he and I will do stuff out at his studio, and we're just old friends who met through like metal shows and things like that. And yeah, we just hung out on this past Friday, and really brainstorming some things. And so like over the years, we would do these events, and we were always trying to mess with things too. Where we're like, let's have like a noise band, but then also like an amateur wrestling match, and someone reading their PhD dissertation about like Nietzsche and bloody like whatever. We just kind of like doing these different shows,
Mhm.
and this guy Brian Duran, who used to manage Gang Gang Dance and Animal
Oh yeah.
Collective and stuff, he went to one of those, and he was like, "Oh, these are really interesting." So he was the bridge between me and Melissa, where he had talked to Melissa, and she was saying she wanted to try to put on a festival upstate. Then he was like, "Oh, I think you should talk to this guy Brandon I know because he's doing seems like kind of what you want to do, which is a festival, but not really a festival, like a festival, but a festival where we can like get away with doing things in a different way." It's like one of the very early soundscapes one thing was like something Matthew and I collaborated on where we had 4 bands play at the same time, and it was Pig Destroyer, Juliana Barwick, Pharmacon, and Evian Christ, who's like an electronic artist on Triangle. And we had our friend Jonathan Beppeler, who's a composer and does like a lot of Matthew's Cremaster soundtracks and other soundtrack work. He created like a notational thing, kind of like a John Zorn kind of situation
Mm.
to sort of show the people to do. So like we can get away with stuff like that there, which was you're not going to go to Coachella and have someone do that. So like that's kind of what we were trying to mess with was like, and early on someone tagged it like the anti-festival, and we don't really see it
Yeah.
that way. Like it's not like in a negative way. It's more just like we're trying to do stuff, yeah, that feels like a community, like more like community programming in a way, or like something that feels special. Like when the Hacks and Cloak played, I remember he did a thing with Nick Zinner, and we had like he was like a special like collaborative project at one point, or we would try to get people, yeah, just to step out of their comfort zone if they were willing to, and try to loop in like last year when we did one, we had like Hanif Abdurraqib did a reading right before like Godspeed You Black Emperor played. It's like trying to
Right.
just like, yeah, like not have it, maybe like keep it surprising in a way. And I think that's always been the sort of the through line. I think we've lucked out where like a band like Explosions in the Sky, I didn't really know them as people, but like I just tweeted about them all the time about how I love their music and how I was always listening to it and crying and all this stuff. And so then when I reached out to them about playing, they gave us like such a deal because we do Basilica without sponsors and stuff. It's like purely ticket sales, and they're a band that can sell out, Terminal 5 and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And they're like, we love what you're doing, and they came and did it for what we could afford to pay them, and I was like very appreciative.
Cool.
Swans did the same thing when Swans
Mm.
played, so I think people see it for what it is. Like one thing Melissa and I always agreed upon is we never wanted to expand outside of the building where we have the event. So we're
Right.
never going to like set up a stage out back and be like, welcome to the Verizon, whatever stage. It's more just like, let's keep it inside. Let's not have sponsors if we can do it without sponsors. Or if we do find someone to help, it's something that we can like get behind and agree with. Yeah, and not size up all the time. Like there's this interview with Justin Vernon, Bon Iver that
Mhm.
I had on my website on the Creative Independent, where he's like, yeah, there's always this desire to scale up constantly, and not everyone has to be Walmart. Like you can actually just reach a point where you're like, cool,
Totally.
this is where I want to be. So I think that's part of the idea with the curation too. And I think one thing that's been fun is going back and being like, oh yeah, like some of these artists are huge now. And like when we had them, we just liked the music and we thought this music is interesting and or beautiful or makes sense here. And now these folks could like play rooms, 3 times the size of that or something. And it goes back to like when I lived in Buffalo, I booked one of the Nationals' first shows. And I remember with all my heart, like promoting that show, like there was no tomorrow. And it got like 60 people to come, and it was like, I really tried. I wrote something for the local newspaper. Like I did all this promotion. And then, through that is how I became friends with Matt, mostly Matt and Aaron way back when. And then I remember at one point, Matt sent a video to me and Jane, who's my wife now. We were like dating at the time. And it was them on stage in Europe with this huge audience. And Jane was like, did you do this in some like video editing thing or something like that? Like she couldn't believe that was their audience. He's like, no. Where like things are starting to happen, like that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I think that's the thing too, is like learning how long things can take, like I remember with Matt, for instance, like way back when we were sitting in a bar in like the East Village, and it was when the Village Voice was still a print publication. And there was a big feature on Interpol, and he was like, man, Interpol's always going to get the features. We're always the band that like just gets forgotten about, or it just gets the small little mention,
Yeah.
And I think that's like a lesson that I've learned through the years of being involved in this zone, is that it really does take a long time too. So I think booking shows and pushing for stuff you care about, not just trying to cash in on like, yeah, let's book the obvious thing, has always been my approach. And maybe it's not always the like smartest thing financially, or like, yeah, it's probably not the smartest thing financially, but it's still just like, it's a fun challenge. And we're still at the point with Basilica that I'm like refreshing the ticket thing all the time. Like, all right, we sold some tickets, like I kind of like that energy. Like that still feels like, reminds me of being a kid, and just like, it's not a sure thing. Even if you have a cool lineup, people have to get all the way to Hudson. So not everyone's going to come.
Totally.
Yeah. I like the challenge of that and not just falling into like a system or an easy template. Like we actually just announced a show today in Brooklyn. That's like Nadia from Pussy Riot's new like noise project. And it's like Liturgy. I asked Liturgy, like, hey, would you do like maybe a different kind of set than normal? So she's going to do like a synthesizer acoustic kind of set, which will be interesting. And then JD Sampson's going to DJ, and Kelly Moran's going to do prepared piano. And I was like, this is a cool line. And it's like, there's a through line, but it also is like, and Nadia and JD have done work together in the past. It felt like, and honestly, JD's my neighbor, and I was walking on the street, and she walked past me in the morning, and we're always like, hey, we always stop and talk for a little bit. And then the second she left, I was like, wait, that's the DJ we need for this at JD. So I think it goes back to that too. A lot of it is, community and friends and friendship and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, totally. I mean, that feels like a much truer place than making smart decisions for financial reasons. Yeah, I mean, part of what I loved about Basilica is kind of that element of friction of like having to take the train up to Hudson and kind of making a whole weekend out of it, turning it into a pilgrimage of sorts. I mean, at the time I didn't have any money, so it was just like I appreciated that you could go camping and like that was cheap. And I I was looking at the prices of Basilica, and it continues to be incredibly reasonable. I think compared to what everything else costs these days. Yeah, had some really connective moments at that place. I remember we were having too much fun at the Half Moon the first year we went there, and we missed the last bus out to the campsite. So we had to hitchhike, and ended up with this like Olympic sprinter in his car at 4 a.m. And then the next year we to avoid that situation again, we just camped across the street from the Basilica in the woods. Ended up raining, and we ended up having to go find trash bags that we could use as a tent.
I remember that year, yeah, the rain. We were helping a lot of people get out of that. It's funny, like I was saying, we're watching The Bear, and there's this episode we watched last night where the chef is closing her restaurant. She's giving a speech, and she says, yeah, I think people, they remember the people, not the food. And I feel like maybe like you're saying with Basilica, you remember these moments of the people, and you looked up the bands to remember who you saw and stuff. And that's important. The bands are important, but I do think those interactions with people there are kind of amazing. And I think I've had a lot of that too, where you go to the Half Moon and you see someone dancing in a way you're like, well, that person dances. Or like people are, you know, folks that are like getting out of their shell a little bit is pretty amazing. And yeah, I think one of my kids is ringing the doorbell, but yeah, it's, I think that kind of, that sort of element of just like having the community and having like an actual feel. And I was going to say too, in those early days, I feel like our security wasn't great. You probably could have even snuck in, you know, like I think that's the thing too. Like even if you had no money, you're like, all right. But I remember Drew Daniel from like Matt Mosen, et cetera. He came to that first one and he took a train all the way from Baltimore or something. He showed up with like a backpack and was like, all right, here I am and ready to go. And I was like, this is great. It feels like, yeah, people are just showing up, getting here how they can. And that idea of community of like, all right, I missed the last bus. So, hey, stranger, Olympic sprinter, like, let's go out on this thing together. Yeah. And I think it used to be that thing like when I was a teenager or something and I'd see someone with like a Laughing Hyenas t-shirt on or something. I'd be like, oh, wow, that person is probably someone that would be interesting to talk to. And you would just kind of have those little like signals that would pop up or like the bat signal or whatever. And so they were like, all right, cool. Like, let's have a conversation. And I think it's great when you can still have those at shows and just like meet random people or that all that element of it I love too. And I think you can have that more in a thing that lasts a whole weekend and you can like leave the room and sit outside for a while and talk to people out there. Clubs can be so loud, it's very hard, you know.
Yeah. But truly. I know, I really appreciate that. It was a very connective space. Cool. Well, that seems like a good moment to transition into part 2, where I ask you a little bit more. You've already dropped, a lot of the music that you're listening to these days, but I'd love to dive a little bit more into that element of your world. And my first question is I'm curious how, you've touched on this a bit, but how you primarily discover music, and if you could talk a bit, about that in terms of, who your favorite curators are, who your most frequented outlets are, and or platforms that you spend time with.
Sure. I find that often I'll hit up friends, and I keep saying this, but it's kind of like, for a while, my friend Michael Miller was like, he was one of the editors at Book Forum, and I was sort of hit him up and say, what were your 10 favorite books of the year or something? And then I can find books, or like Ed Park and someone who was an editor of mine at the Village Voice. And now, like, sometimes I'm like, some of my friends who maybe go to way more shows than I do at this point, who are younger, like the writer Ariel Gordon, I'll often now and then just hit her up and say, like, what's some stuff you're listening to? And then go with that. I have a friend named Greta Rainbow, who's a writer, ask her that. Jen Pelly. So it's often like individuals, just like people whose taste I trust, and I'll go that way. It often comes up. My friend Caleb, who runs the label Sacred Bones, listens to a lot and has good taste. So I'll ask him stuff, and his taste can lean towards country sometimes, which is cool because that's what I grew up with. So I'll sort of ask him, like, what's some interesting country stuff you're listening to, or like, if I'm curating an event, I'm like, hey, I really wanted to have PharmaCon do this thing, but I see she's not available. Like, what's something else in that zone you could think of? And so often I often do, like, as much as I'm not like much into algorithms, I will, if I'm like using a streaming platform, I will sometimes look to see who they say are similar artists just out of curiosity. Like, all right, have I heard of these people? Like, does that person seem interesting? A lot comes to me through things people pitch for the creative independent. Like a lot, like, the creative independent is not just music, it's also like film and books and cooking and all this other stuff and dance. But a lot of people pitch music, so I like go through music that way. There's I have a few freelancers who do a lot of freelance for me, and so like at this point I know to trust their taste, so I'll check stuff out that they recommend. There's this guy Max Friedman who does a lot of writing, and so and he tends to like focus on like maybe queer artists and like stuff that can be more electronic or indie, and so like, all right, cool, he has good taste, I'll check out what he's listening to. This guy Jeffrey, who writes for the site and is more into like Americana. I don't know, this past year I've gone to more festivals I don't normally go to, just to see people. Like, I went to the Tree Fort Festival in Idaho to meet my brother there, who lives in Santa Cruz now, and he's like deeply into Built to Spill. And so he goes every year because Built to Spill is always there. So we went there, and we went to a festival in a way that I normally don't do anymore, where he was like, let's just see everything. And he really kind of went through the booklet and circled things that seemed interesting to him. And I was like, wow, it reminded me of when I was young and I would do that. And now like I found that I would get into this pattern of like, all right, I'm at South by Southwest like a few years ago. And it was when I was managing like way more people than I manage now. So I was managing like Cassandra Jenkins and a few other people. And it was at a time when like she was figuring out her label situation. So I was like, I'm going to Cassandra's shows. So I was kind of really like just going based on where I had to be to meet with people and all of that.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was really nice to go to a festival where I had nothing to do with anyone playing and I could just kind of go and see stuff. And so, yeah, Jeffrey Silverstein, who writes for my site, he played. So I went to that to see him play. And then like, my brother had his list of stuff. And yeah, I think it's really through like conversations and through my friend Matt, who I mentioned before, who was one of the curators at PS1. He manages Holly Herndon and does that label Revenge. I'll ask him for tips. It's just really that. Like I'm just kind of always asking people like, hey, what do you like? And I think I trust individuals more than any publications at the moment. Like I feel like, yeah, like no offense to Pitchfork. I worked there for so long, but I think the current Pitchfork is not super inspiring. And I go there, I'm like, this feels like, I don't know, like I don't know. It's like it's what do you call those places? The malls where they have like all the things people didn't buy, and you go there. It's like the outlet mall. It feels like it feels like an outlet mall or something. It's like doesn't seem very interesting or very inspiring. And like I noticed that like the pictures on the main page are getting bigger and bigger because there's like less and less content. So it's like
I noticed that
these two massive stories, because we have nothing on here. So I feel like zines, like if I come across like zines or just publications people work on their own, like Ariel Gordon, who I mentioned before, like she did a zine recently called Drug Music. That was interesting. And she gave me a copy. Yeah, I think more and more, and like, or people that do interesting like Substacks. I don't really subscribe to any Substacks, but I'll like look at stuff here and there when people have, if it's a writer that I like. Yeah, like Evan Minsker, I like his writing. Who was at Pitchfork and did a lot about like punk and garage rock, like that kind of stuff. Philip Sherburne, who I feel like his taste is very good, and so if he recommends something, I've done the thing where like I'll go on his byline on Pitchfork and read all the stuff he gave like a 7.9 and higher to, and then just like get all that, So that it's like that kind of thing, yeah.
Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, I feel like even at the height of the blog, I was more, there was some blogs that were more likely to have, the individuals that I like to follow because I trusted their music taste. But even then, it was kind of about the individual journalist and the individual curator and tastemaker. So that makes sense.
Yeah, I like Anthony Fantano too. I think he's a nice guy. He's funny. And I remember like in the olden days when I was still doing like my metal column at Pitchfork, Show No Mercy, like he reached out to me on Twitter in my DMs one day and was just like, hey, are you at South by Southwest? And like I was, and we met up and I was like, this guy's cool and it was a lot about music. And so it was nice to see how he just grew so much and how he's such a big force in that zone. And I feel like one thing I've seen from managing musicians is that at this point in like 2024 or whatever, getting a good review from him has more impact than Pitchfork, and it's like, because more kids pay attention to him. I think the Pitchfork review helps for promoters because then they can say this thing had best new music or something like that. And then like, that's good shorthand for promoters. We go, we should book this thing because this person got best new music. But just for pure reach, it's interesting to see how the channels have changed so much. And like I interviewed him on my website a few months ago, and even he was like, yeah, now I feel like I'm getting old. And there's actually like people on doing TikTok reviews or this or he's sort of like, it just keeps evolving, which I think is interesting. So you have like the Robert Christgau kind of critic or like whatever, then it just keeps like shifting, that eventually it's just like some guy or woman in their house just like talking about music. And if they have a good taste, I'll listen to it. Like I definitely am not one of those people who's like, no, it has to be this or it has to be written. Like I think his reviews are just as good as any review I would read, but he's speaking them. And it's because he's compelling to watch. And there's plenty of people like that too, I think, that have found a new way through it. That's interesting.
Yeah, totally. We have to change with the times.
Yeah. It's no good being stodgy. It's like not a good look, to be like the old guy that's like, no, this is the way it had to be.
Like cloud. Yeah.
I do like how things circle back though, and like you'll see people are getting back into print zines, and there are younger people now that are like,
Mhm.
I'm going to get a flip phone, not a smartphone.
Yeah.
Or like people getting into cassettes again. Like that kind of stuff is cool just to see that it recirculates. And like that, you know what I like? I really like that new MJ Lenderman album, actually.
Mm.
And I feel like he's someone who I listened to one song. I was like, whoa, this reminds me of like music I liked in the 90s, but it feels different too. And I have this neighbor named Hank. And he's like got 2 kids, and I know the kind of music he likes at this point. I'm like, all right, this guy kind of likes to hold steady, likes this.
Mm.
I have a sense of his taste, and I sent him a link to that, and he was like, this is exactly, so I think like that kind of thing, like that kind of music, I think it's doing something very 90s, but also very present, which is cool. And then I like the last Waxahachie album too, and it's kind of, I think, where I zeroed in on MJ Lenderman, because for the one song, it was a great song, but I think he really made it with his backing vocals. And I was like, all right, this song is elevated because of this guy's presence. And in the video, he just seems so like stoic riding the boat too. I was like, this guy has a cool vibe, seems very disengaged in a way that's interesting. So yeah, I think often that, like noticing a detail, then like coming back to it later, I'm like, oh yeah, this is that same person. And yeah, I think too, like talking to labels, to go back to discovering music. Like I'm often just talking to people at labels, and they're like, hey, we're putting out this new like a Lucid record, or like we're doing something with Billy Woods, and I'm like, all right, cool. Then I'll just like check it out. And so it's a lot of it is that label people that I think are like have good taste. Like Ed Horrocks at 4AD, I think has amazing taste. And now and then I'll just write him and say, what are you listening to? Same kind of thing. Send me back a list of 10 things. So I'm realizing now, just ask a lot of people.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like the way to go.
Yeah.
I mean, when you can tap into these types of people, like that is definitely the best way to find out what to listen to. Okay, my next question for you. If you can remember, what is the first album you ever purchased? And then what is the most recent?
The first thing I purchased, the first album I purchased, well, I remember the first CD I purchased, which was Pixies Doolittle. And that was in high school. I think the first album I purchased was probably like a Minor Threat 7-inch. Does that count as an album? It's not
I
a
think
full
so.
album.
Yeah.
But I remember like because for a while, like Moss and I would always listen on cassettes. And then I remember buying like a Minor Threat 7-inch, probably a Youth of Today record. I liked Youth of Today as a kid. 7 Seconds record. So it's definitely some hardcore kind of stuff. But I remember at that same time, I was also into Depeche Mode and things like that. So I was also probably buying those. But so I think like Minor Threat 7-inch, Pixies, Doolittle CD. And then most recently, what's the most recent thing I purchased? I buy things. My son and I do a radio show together at the Lot Radio. And like I choose half the songs and he chooses half. And I think what did I purchase for that? I might have been like, no, let me see. I can actually pull it up because we had a show like a month ago, and I remember I bought something for it. Let me look. But yeah, we call the show "Cats in the Cradle," and it's sort of a joke on like not spending time with your parents, but we
love
do
that.
it. But like last year, we played like Swirlies and Black Tambourine and Velocity Girl and stuff. So a lot of those older things I had. I bought like that last Devin Welsh album, which I thought was really, and he was the guy from Magical Clouds. And one of his songs just really struck me. And it's this song where like he begins by saying he's a loser. And it's kind of this really sad song, but the video is kind of goofy, where he's wearing one of those like fake muscle suits and he's going around playing. And he's like, he plays basketball with a guy that I recognize used to be in Deaf Heaven. Just, it was like that kind of thing. And I was like, so that struck me. And I really liked Magical Clouds. So I bought that. And yeah, that's a great record. And then I also bought like one of the Horse Girl records because their pop kind of reminded me of like like the older stuff I was listening to, like the Velocity Girl and the Swirlies and all that kind of thing. Then also some stuff like I'll go back to if I can't find my copy of it and my kids are into something. Like I bought some like Public Enemy stuff because I was trying to explain to them how interesting the production was and I couldn't find my copies. So often it's replacing older things too. Like, oh yeah, I weirdly enough not weirdly enough, but it's not, I guess, like the most popular record in the world, but I love Boogie Down Productions' Edutainment. That was like a record my brother and I listened to all the time as kids. So I recently got that again because I was always kind of singing the songs around the house and the kids were like, what the heck are these songs? So I got that and we listened to that. We actually ended up playing some of that on the radio show too.
Cool.
So still like buying a lot of things and often like replacing things that have gone missing over the years. Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah, when you're like start to see the music or hear the music kind of through your kids' eyes, or wanting to share that with them, and then realizing you don't have it and having an excuse to like go down memory lane, go into a rabbit hole once again. It's pretty cool.
Definitely, and that production is amazing. Actually, if you listen to the old Public Enemy, it's just like, wow, it's cool that they're doing that. So yeah, I think it's also like explaining to them like, hey, this was not done with computers. This was done, through people cutting. All that kind of stuff is interesting to go through the process.
Totally.
And just the amazing mix of like Chuck D, who's so like stoic and like precise, and Flavor Flav, who's so goofy. And I'm like, this is just amazing, amazing mix. So yeah.
Cool. Let me go back to that. Okay, who's 3 artists of note that you heard for the first time in the past year-ish?
First time in the last year. Let me think. Dang. I'm trying to think of who I heard of well, there's some people that I heard in different ways. Like there's this artist based in LA named Marina Allen, and I like her music. Then like her most recent album felt like more expansive. The earlier stuff felt more folky, and this suddenly felt like slightly weirder, and like songs were expanding out a lot. So I think I'd heard her before, but then I heard her in a new way. And I think that record's really amazing. It's on Fire Records. So that was, I think, something slightly different. I heard this artist Freak Slug, who I'd never heard. And I haven't heard much of her stuff. But she like did a collaboration with my friend Aoife Francis, who's an Irish artist, on Partisan. And I was helping Aoife with some stuff. And so she was collaborating with Freak Slug for this project. And so I looked, sort of checked her music out. And I think she was really interesting and seems to be doing stuff in a surprising way. And I feel like she covers a New Order song. But yeah, I thought she was interesting. And who else? I feel like sometimes let me think. I want to be accurate here. I can look and find something out. Let's see. First time in the last. Oh yeah, this artist Hannah Stretton, who I didn't really know much about, but my friend Zion, whose name is Zion Battle, who's like a young musician, he recommended her to me, and a lot of it is like super ambient, like you can like hear a barn door shut kind of thing, and like creaky stairs, and I think her stuff is very beautiful. And yeah, I really appreciated that too. I feel like I find so much stuff that it's hard to even narrow it down. Like I just
sounds like it.
Yeah, like the other day, like this artist reached out to me whose band name is Lucky Break. And her stuff is amazing. And it's just like someone who wrote me through my Creative Independent email and was like, hey, here's my music. I'm really into like Elliott Smith and this and that. And I was like, all right, I'll take a listen. And I was like, whoa, this is great. So I think often it's coming that way too. So that's the first time I heard her music as well.
Cool.
But so much, yeah. I think like I work with More Mother, and Kume listens to a lot of music, and she's always like sending things to me. So I learn a lot through her. She has her ear to the ground and a lot of like jazz, but punk, and she did some work with some like it's more like metal related stuff recently. And so that kind of set me down like a doom metal kind of thing. I was like, oh, I'll listen to the new Paul Bear and this and that. So yeah, she did a collaborative project with Sumac, which was really cool. So I feel like I hear a lot of new stuff. I'm definitely not like static, or I'm not like just thinking like these were the good old days. All we can listen to is like Nutriment Hotel. That's all we got. It's like I like to kind of like go and find. No defense to them either, because we listen to them a lot in the car with my kids, and they can sing along with all the songs. But it's like, there's a lot of new stuff. Sorry, my dog.
Yeah, no worries. Dogs are welcome here. Oh man, Nutrimilk Hotel. I just got "Oh Comely" stuck in my head instantly. I think I'm gonna listen to that after this.
It's an amazing record, and my kids got really into history and World War II and stuff. So we were kind of talking about all the Anne Frank references and this and that. So yeah, it's like fun to go deep on that too. And to explain Jeff Mangum to a degree to them too. Like, oh, here's someone who is maybe not super out there in the world and like doing tons of interviews and kind of laying low a little bit. And like, I think it's interesting too. I mean, I know they did the reunions and all that, but that idea of, especially for young people who are so plugged in all the time, it's like, oh yeah, you can actually do this in a way that's not so plugged in at all times. That record's a classic though. Like I still remember I got that when I lived in Canada, and I remember like buying it and coming home and playing it with my girlfriend at the time, we were just like, whoa. Like, it's one of those things where you just knew that it was, like a classic record the first time you heard it. Like, same thing with Loveless. First time I heard Loveless, I was like, whoa, like just kind of blown away, and just sat there in my dorm room, like listening to it over and over again.
Yeah. Cool. Well, speaking of trying to span the entirety of a music life that has had a lot of music in it, here is, the last question, which you may have been prepared for after seeing some of the other episodes, but it's the classic, you're going to a desert island, you get to bring 3 records with you. What are they?
Well, The Cure's Disintegration would be one for sure. I would bring, I think, probably My Buddy Valentine's Loveless, because I feel like that
Nice.
is a record that can kind of adapt. It kind of flows out into the world in a way where I feel like you wouldn't get sick of it. You keep hearing new stuff in there. I think same thing with Disintegration. Like, when I listen to that, I'm like, Jesus, this production is amazing. Like, every time I listen to it, I'm like, something else. It still feels very resonant. And it's kind of one of those records that as you grow older, you can be young. Like, I think that came out when I was in high school, and it still feels, I still feel a lot through that record, but it's different than what I felt when I was younger. And like, you kind of grow along, the record grows along with you, is what I'm saying, I guess. So I think those two, and then for a third, it's less easy. I feel like there's so many possibilities. Third record. Yeah. I was thinking of ones, and it's very hard for me. It's like those two are surefire ones. For a third one, maybe I would bring, I've listened to a lot of Magnetic Fields, actually. Maybe I would bring like 69 Love Songs, because it's so long. So I'd have a lot of songs to go through. And like, not all the songs are great, but the ones that are great are like amazing. Like Papa's a Rodeo, or these others. Like, there's such amazing songs on that. But yeah, there's something about like, I love like Jesus and Mary Chains, like certain like older Darklands kind of vibe and stuff. Like, those things I can hear them over and over again, or like Joy Division or whatever. But I would say, maybe like Magnetic Fields. So there's a little bit of levity too, because there's like humor in that record.
Right.
It's not all heaviness. So that way, if I'm on the island, I can have some fun as well. Though there's really none of those records are very good for dancing. So it would be hard just to have 3 records.
That's true. Well, I mean, when there's no one to dance with, it's less fun to dance anyways.
That's true. Well, it can be. I mean, you can sometimes dancing alone can be amazing if it's the right moment.
That's true. That's true. Yeah. I mean, I haven't spent much time on a deserted island, so I don't know what it would feel like, what I would need.
Well, at this point, I feel like you can find some connection, some Wi-Fi somewhere, or you could get some cell reception and download something really quickly.
Yeah, true. True. Cool. Well, that is all she wrote, Brandon. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
For being on here. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It was, it's my pleasure. For folks who are listening who want to go to Basilica SoundScape, which they should if they're local, or if they're not, or check out, the Creative Independent, or anything else that you're doing, what is a good place for them to do that?
I guess maybe Twitter is central in a way, or X or whatever it's called. So just like, at BRANDONSTOSUY, or my website is thecreativeindependent.com. And actually, while we're talking, one of the people I do Basilica with just hit me up about something on Instagram. We need to post something on Instagram. So I think Instagram as well can work for, like, whether it's Basilica or at least my personal Instagram or the Creative Independent Instagram. But yeah, unfortunately, I don't have anything central. I don't have my own personal website.
No, that
sucks. Yeah. Someone asked me about LinkedIn one day, and I was like, I don't have LinkedIn, and I don't have Facebook, but I do have Twitter, and I do have Instagram. So
yeah, you don't want to have all of the things, then you have to be in all of the places, and it's overwhelming.
No, for sure. My kids use TikTok, and just looking over their shoulders, I'm like, I don't need to get into that.
Yeah, I feel that. And my last question for you, since you were an answer to this question, now that you've been through the ringer, who is another music head that we should invite to have on the show?
I think you should invite Jen Pelly. I think she's a great music writer, thinks deeply about the music she cares about. I met her in a very great, fun way, actually, where like years ago, she tweeted out like, I wish I could get to this grouper show. and I realized I couldn't use my ticket, so I just like hit her up. I was like, if you want my ticket, it's yours, kind of thing. And then she's like, all right, I owe you one. Then I was putting on a show with Swans, and Michael Girard needed his guitar tuned, and I couldn't get away from my house. And so I was like, I wrote her back, hey, I'm hitting you up for that favor. Can you do this? And she came and got the guitar and did it. And then we've been friends since, and I've worked on, she's done a lot of stuff with Basilica. We've done a lot of projects together over the years. And she's written a book on the Raincoats and writes for the Times and for Pitchfork and a bunch of other publications. And yeah, she's great. And her sister, Liz Pelley, has done a lot of amazing research on like the music industry and streaming and like, yeah, maybe you could, have you ever done a double interview? It could be cool to interview Liz and Jen because they're both people in music.
Yeah, I have done one double interview on here. But yeah, I met Liz once after she did. Yeah, it was like at a comedy show in New York. And for some reason, like she was like the halftime entertainment where she did like this big sort of expose on Spotify and how shitty it is. And I met her at that point. But yeah. At one point I was subscribing to their, because they had like a joint newsletter thing together.
Yeah.
I remember subscribing to that. But yeah, that's a great shout. And I will definitely invite Jen to the show.
Yeah. She's awesome. So
cool. Awesome. Well, thank you again, Brandon. Really appreciate it. It's it's been really great connecting.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Be well. And good luck with Basilica this year. I wish I could be there.
Thank you. Yeah. Next year.
Yeah, indeed. Indeed. I want to come back.
Cool. See you.
All right, man. Take care. Bye.
Thanks everyone for being here. That is a wrap on another episode of For the Record, a conversation series with all manner of music heads about their stories and the music that makes them. It's a production of Grey Matter and the new Crate Coalition experiment in building connective listening graphs. We stamp every music mention that you heard here, from the names of musicians to DJs to journalists to venue owners. And in the background, we're mapping these names to form those yet unseen connective threads between them. Want to get involved? Check out our website, greymatter.fm. It's Grey with an E. Or you can come hang out in the Crate Coalition Discord. We'll see you next time.